For those of you that don't know me, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I was raised in the Georgetown Church of God. I remember many services as a little kid, going to sleep underneath the pews from Sunday night services and revivals and so on. But as you get a little older, most all of us, we drift away. Got up into my teens and drifted away. Didn't go to church for a long time. And so when the pastor threw this thing up about testimony, and he said, we're overcomers by our testimony, I said, well, we all have things to overcome. And I covered y'all's prayers, and I have things to overcome, so that brings me to where I stand right now. So to put everything into a nutshell before I start, if I threw it in a nutshell, it would go like this. I've been shot once. I've been on the operating table 7 different times, and I've had more broken bones than I can count on both hands. So that being said, I know plenty of you have said to the kids, don't play with guns. And I'm sure Mama probably told me somewhere along the line the same thing, but I didn't listen. So at 17 years old, myself and another friend were playing with some pistols. And in a blink, I had a bullet. I looked at him and I said, I got a bullet in my leg. He says, no, you wouldn't be standing here telling me this if you wouldn't. And so I reached down and showed him the blood pouring down the side of my leg, and he realized it was true. Well, next thing you know, I'm in the hospital. They removed the bullet, and I go home. That was the beginning of it. A few months went by, my leg swelled up, and I'm back in the hospital. So now they tell me that the bullet had grazed an artery, and the artery was bleeding inside of my leg, and they would need to repair it. So I went through the surgery, which was a second surgery. I went through the surgery, and I came out. Everything was a success. Everything's okay. Shortly after the surgery, it was like the night or two afterwards, was where the Lord touched me the first time, and I learned something valuable on that touch. I was hurting so bad I couldn't stand it. We had called for pain, and it didn't do any good. It was like there was water in that needle. And my mom was sitting there, and I thank the Lord for a praying mom. She was actually more than just a praying mom and a prayer warrior. I could stand here and tell you till morning came the things that she done. There was many things that the Lord showed her and told her through the years. Well, my mama was sitting there, and I was in such pain, and I just looked at Mama, and I said, I just can't take this. I said, it's just hurting so bad. It's like that they didn't do anything. That needle didn't, it's not phasing it. So, of course, she comes over, and she starts to pray. And I was listening to her prayer at just 17 years old. I'm just listening to her prayer, and I'm hurting. And then her prayer changed. But later I learned that the Lord spoke to her and said, it's a matter of only believe. How many times did they come to Jesus and say, what must I do? And he would say, it's not a matter of doing anything. He would just look at him and say, only believe. Well, while she was praying, I heard her stop and change, and I heard her say, yes, Lord, we believe. We believe, we believe, we believe, we believe. And as she was saying that, I said, okay. I remember them days back in the church when I was a little fella, and I saw all them good services, and okay, I believe. And so I began to say, Lord, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. And then all of a sudden I stopped and I said, wait, am I trying to convince myself of what the Lord can really do? And it was over with. I woke up and I looked, and Mama asked me, how do you feel? And I didn't mean to answer her with a question. I said, what time is it? Because I knew I'd been out for a while. So that was my first thing I learned right then, was to get healing, it's a matter of only believing. So then the years went by, and of course, I didn't go to church and went on. And through those years, one of the things I had been pretty good at was cutting trees. And I don't mean just like a lot of fellows just to cut trees out there in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I would cut trees where other people would look at them and say, I can't touch it. I'd go up to trees, take them apart piece by piece, and I'd done it for so many years it just become nothing to just throw the tree hooks on, run up a tree, take it apart. I mean, people could have fence, pools, everything, and I'd just take it all to pieces. Well, May 14th, 1997, I had a pine tree to knock down for a fellow, and it was right on the edge of his driveway. It was asphalt and concrete, and it stood in the corner. He said, I want the tree down. And I looked at it, and I got a buddy of mine that said, I said, come help me knock this tree down. I said, all you got to do is just get in my vehicle and pull. I'm going to flip the top out of it, and we'll be done for this afternoon. And I said, I'll go back the next day and clean the mess up. And got up there and got in a hurry, and then he got me distracted, and it wasn't but just a minute for me and the top of that tree both was on the ground, except I didn't hit the grass, I hit the asphalt. So now I'm in the hospital, and let me back up if I ain't skipping some parts here that yes. Let me back up. Before May, there was another incident, and it's actually a big one. When I had went through that second operation and had all the pain, there was a third operation and a fourth operation, all because this thing kept breaking loose on the main artery on that leg. And when I went in, it broke loose the next time when I went in, which would have been the fifth operation. I had turned 18 years old then, and I remember them coming in and telling me, look, we're going to do one more operation, but there is so much scar tissue and so much been done, we can't repair the artery anymore. And he handed me a clipboard, and at the top of that clipboard in big black letters said possible amputation. He said, you're 18 now, you got to sign this. And I signed it. So he said, what we're going to do, he said, we're going to remove the main artery out of your left leg. And he said, if your leg accepts it, then we're okay. If your leg does not accept, we will know in a matter of no time, and we will remove that leg before you, while you're still under anesthesia, before you wake up, it'll all be over. So I went into surgery. I go into recovery. I get up the next morning, and I look, and I see 2 feet. And I'm like, okay, this is good so far. So the surgeon came in, and he says, how you feeling? I said, pretty good. He says, let me check that leg. And he pulls the sheet back, and he puts his hand and feels. He says, you got good warmth. And, of course, at that time, I didn't even know there was such thing as a pulse at your ankle. And he reaches down, and he gets this funny look on his face, and he says, I'll be right back. Well, it takes him an hour or so, and I'm thinking, where in the world is he at? Well, he came back, he held the door open, and he filled the room up with students, and they got these books in their hand, and you couldn't move in that place. So he takes out his clipboard here, and he tells them, he said, okay, he's the first surgery, and he starts going through the whole thing about the gunshot and repairing the artery, and goes down, and he gets all the way, and then he stops. And he looks at each one of them, and he says, I need each one of you to work your way around to this bedside and feel the pulse on his ankle. And as each one of them come around and felt the pulse on it, when they all get back, he looked at them and he said, okay, flips the page. He said, last night, I removed myself the main artery out of his left leg. He said, medically speaking, he said, it's like knocking them power lines down out here and coming in and try to flip lights on. Don't happen. Then he looked at all of them and he said, now did everybody feel that pulse? You could hear a pin drop in that room. He looked at all of them. He said, what has happened here, he said, you will not find in the medical books that you're holding. He said, when you leave here, he said, I don't know where you're going. You'll go to different countries. You'll go wherever. He says, but when you leave here, he said, I want you to know this man had his church and many other churches praying. He says, what you won't find in them books, he said, if you leave here, you learn. Don't ever forget prayer. This is a vascular surgeon telling all these students. Now, they say hindsight's 20/20, and a lot of people talk about proof of miracles. Well, had I just tell him I want a copy of that clipboard with his signature on it, with everything he did, and then turn around and say, and there's the pulse at the ankle, that's as much proof of a miracle as you could ever ask for. But I didn't do all of that. So then we go to May 14th, 1997. I wound up in the hospital from coming out the top of the tree. And that's where I received most of the broken bones. So I spent 7 days in the hospital. The doctor that did all the work came and told me, he said, I wanted to put you in a body cast because you had so many broken bones. He said, but I felt you would fare off better without the body cast. I did have a cast on one arm, and then when I got home, they had one of those things over the top of the bed you can grab a hold of just to even move. So I'm laying at home, and I'm on some pretty good pain medicine. Well, I can't take the pain medicine unless I eat because it's pretty strong. Some of you may have been there. So all of a sudden I started noticing that there was a redness where the incision was, where they did put some of the pins and screws in. So I knew it was infection. And in just a matter of hours, I could feel myself going down. I could just tell without even having nobody take my vital signs. I knew my vital signs were going down. And it got so bad till I knew I was fixing to take an ambulance ride. And when people ask for healing, just remember that it's a matter of only believe. It's not what's in your life. If there's any little thing in your life and you think, well, I might not get this healing because of this, forget that, because everything I've told you so far, I've not yet asked the Lord to forgive me of anything. At this particular time that I'm laying at my house, I had been living with a woman that I wasn't married with for 9 years. So now here I am thinking I could take an ambulance ride, but knowing how my mama is and how she was a prayer warrior, I said, well, I asked her, I said, bring me the phone. I said, if I can just get a hold of Mama. Now later I look back on that, and there was a woman in Mark the 5th chapter with an issue of blood, and she said, if I could just touch the hem of his garment. Well, that's what it took. Will you say, if I can just? Well, she brought me the phone, and I'll remember it like it was yesterday. It only rang twice, and Mama picked up the phone. And I said, Mama, I need prayer. Well, my sister was there, and I heard her say, Debbie, catch my hand. And they began to pray. And as they began to pray, he didn't just touch me. He allowed me to feel the touch. And I also felt the healing virtue as it spread through my body. And in that moment, there was no more pain, no more redness, and I should have jumped up and run down that hallway. And I looked back and wished I had have jumped up and run down that hallway. That's how good I felt. Matter of fact, I thought about it several times, and I said, you know, Had I jumped up and run down that hallway and let Mama and them know, because on the other end of the line, both of them was having church on the other end. They was speaking in tongues and going on. I'm not real sure they could have stood it. So anyway, so then, without waiting until I came to church, I figured, well, he's done enough for me. It's time. So laying right there in that bed, moments after that healing, I asked him to forgive me. So then on the other end of the line, I can still hear Mama and them praying. I said, Mama, y'all can stop praying now. So that was May 14th, 1997. And from May 14th, you figure with all those broken bones, and on Father's Day, I was sitting in this church. Of course, this building wasn't here, neither was that back there. We were in that church. But I was in church on Father's Day and have been here ever since. So, now, Brother Bobby's heard my testimony and a couple of others, but then there was something that happened after that. I had been coming to church here for a few years, and I was at the house. I had been at the house working on this small car, and it was during the cold weather, and it was a rainy day, and I had pulled the car up far enough to get the front end underneath the lean-to work on it. When it stopped raining, and when I'd pulled the car up there, I had rolled the windows down, and another cloud came back up, and I had went to go get parts for the car. Before I could make it back, it had started raining again, and the water's coming off that roof and hitting both them windows and wetting the seats. So I get back, and I said, okay, well, I rolled the seats up, and I said, well, it's going to take some doing to dry this car out. So I didn't have an electric heater, so I had a propane heater, and I hooked it up, put the propane bottle outside the car, ran the hose into the car, set the heater up right there, turned it on low, and left it. I figured it'd get 80, 90 degrees in that car and dry them seats out, and I'd be all right. So the next morning early, I went out and I checked on it, and my heater was out. And it was drizzling rain again, so I jumped in the car in the back seat, slammed the door, and leaned up between the seats, never smelt propane anywhere, and tried to figure out, why is my heater off? And the lighter was laying right there, and I just reached and grabbed that lighter and just clicked. And when I said click, there was this tremendous explosion. This huge ball of fire and explosion. It blew every glass, windshield, back glass, everything. It almost blew the doors off that car. I had a tractor sitting, and I stepped it off about 50 feet away, and there was glass laying in the seat all over it. So had anything been within 50 feet of it, it would have showered them in glass. It blew the front windshield out so hard that there was a work shed in front of me, and when it blew that shock wave against that wall, later I walked in my shed and things on that wall were all in the floor. That's how strong the blast was. And when it blew, my ears were ringing so hard I couldn't hear anything, but I was standing there looking at myself, and I'm thinking, why am I not burned? And so I went to try to open the doors, but they had been blown till they were all bulged out and was no opening them. So I bailed out the window and come around the other side of the car, and I stood and looked at it. And all I could say was, thank you, Lord. And when I did, I could feel the Spirit of the Lord all over me to the point it buckled me to my knees. Though it was raining and the ground was wet and my knees was getting wet, I didn't care. I fell down to my knees and sat there and looked at that. And my daughter-in-law came out a few minutes later. She says, what in the world happened? She said, something just shook this whole trailer. And I pointed at the car, and she said, good grief. She said, Where were you? I said, in the car. She said, there is no way. She looked at me and she said, you ain't got a scratch on you, nothing. She said, there's no way you were in that car. I said, I was in that car when it blew. So I called my mom, and she had told me she had had a dream, and she said, I can't figure it out. She said, I'm not getting enough of it to see what's going on. She said, all I can make out is miracle, miracle, miracle. And when I called Mom and I started explaining to her what happened, she went to speaking in tongues, and she said, that's the miracle. She said, that's it. That was my dream. So, thank you. And that brings me to where we're at now. So, I hope I didn't cut it too short. Thank you.